I'm pleased to introduce the first series of discussions surrounding the topic of demystifying headhunting and recruitment in order to empower you to best position yourself in the market for your next job. And now I'm excited to introduce Neil Martin, Director at MBR Partners Limited, one of the leading international search agencies in the tech space. Thank you for taking the time with me today, Neil. And I would like to start with the first topic of the series, which is how to structure your CV.
Okay, well, I want to start by saying that MBR Partners, we deal with a lot of it, pretty senior level execs, and the quality of CVs that come through to us, I would say are 95% poor. It seems to me that people start writing their CV when they graduate, and they end up just adding and adding and adding to that CV over time, and it becomes one drawn out mess. I think people really need to go back a step and think, what is this CV for, and how am I going to present myself in the best possible light?
Okay, well, let's start with the basics. How long should a CV be?
Well, I think it depends obviously at what stage in your career you're at. A graduate, for example, one page will be sufficient. That said, a few years ago, everyone was saying, okay, in the industry, that 2 pages should be more than enough to cover most people's profiles. I think that's incorrect. I think what people have to think about is, what job am I actually applying for, and what experience do I have that will make me relevant to that job, and tailor their CV specifically for that role. Now, that may well mean running into sort of 3 or 4 pages, but it's really essential that that information is covered.
Okay, well, so you mentioned the importance of getting your points across clearly. How would you recommend doing that?
Okay, well, first of all, I would start by clearly having your name and your contact details. On your contact details, quite a few people have their personal email addresses. Now, if they may be humorous email addresses, my recommendation is to actually come up with another email address, just as, this is a professional profile and everything that's on there should be professional. On that note, actually, as well, I would recommend not having hobbies mentioned anywhere in the CV. It's better that we just keep this a professional profile. To start with, I would suggest having a summary, just writing a little bit about yourself and your overall profile, and your key list of achievements, which may have been involving, let's say, selling to X, Y, and Z companies, hitting targets 8 out of 10 years, or how your career has grown over the last few years. The next thing I would do is have a reverse chronological order to the profile. It's really important that you have your job titles clearly labelled, the companies that you're working for, and for how long you were working there. So many people seem to be missing key dates in their CV, and they really need to come out. The other part is having some information about that role. And I don't mean a story, I mean some bullet points as to what your role was and how you achieved in that role. And if it's a technology role where you're a developer, what specific languages you were using, what you were using them for. This is all information that really needs to be there. Now, on that note, again, some people with tech CVs have a skills matrix saying every single language under the sun, how strong they are with them, how many years experience. Actually, that by itself is not particularly useful, because who's rating how good you are at something anyway? And also, for how long have you used them in relevant roles? So all of that, if you're going to have a skills matrix, by all means have it, but also have it reflected in the CV itself under the jobs that you've got and where you've used them. And obviously then cover off the key details in terms of languages and education levels right at the bottom of the CV. But really, what you want to be focused on is your last 5 years in work, because they really are the why people are thinking you might be relevant. Frankly, if you have a very long part in your CV that is more than 10 years ago, then the chances are it's going to be pretty irrelevant. So really think about here and now. Why would you be relevant for this particular role?
Okay, so it's quite common for some people to have breaks in their CVs or periods of time where they left their roles quite quickly. How would you recommend approaching that?
Well, I think the key thing is to mention why you're having that career break, why there's a gap in your CV. Quite often, I think people try and mask the fact they have gaps by massaging the dates of roles or not putting the dates on at all. I think that's the wrong thing to do, because people do by nature go back and start thinking, well, hang on a minute, what were you doing here? What were you doing here? And again, it puts doubts in people's minds. Now, there are some very obvious reasons why you would want to have a career break. I mean, bringing up children is a classic example of that. However, I would say that you really need to think long and hard before you embark on a career break. Turning around and saying, well, I haven't done any work for the last year because I've been professionally reorientating myself, which is something I hear quite a bit, simply doesn't rub. I would say if you're going to have a break of anything more than sort of 3 to 6 months, it may well have a negative impact on your future career opportunities. So, if you've gone into a different field altogether professionally, that's fine, but just mention that. Say, I've done something entrepreneurial for one reason or another, it didn't work out, project's finished, but this is the truth, this is what I've really been doing. It's much better to be upfront and honest about that. Now, the second thing you mentioned was about people that have jumped from one job to another very quickly. Now, again, there are some quite legitimate reasons why that may have happened. People quite often are attracted to risky roles with clients that might be fast growth clients but very small. Now, everyone knows a lot of those companies don't pan out in the long term. So it may well be that you've been made redundant, the company's downsized. Again, have that clearly labelled on the CV. Now, if that happens time after time after time, you're picking the wrong companies fundamentally, because you have to be aware that longer term, most people, when they're looking to recruit someone, especially if it's a sales role, for example, are looking at having people with a track record that they can quantify. And someone who's been selling something for under a year, I'm afraid that just doesn't work at all. So you really want to be aiming to be in a role for 3 years plus to repair the damage on your CV. And if that means taking a role with a less risky company, I'm sorry, but that's going to be the best thing for you to do at that time.
Okay, and finally, with the social media on the rise, in particular, detailed LinkedIn profiles readily available, is there actually any point in using a CV or resume?
Yeah, absolutely. So your LinkedIn profile is your shop window, but by going inside the shop, you're looking for more details, and that's exactly what your CV should be about. I've seen people with their CVs actually plugged up on LinkedIn. The problem with that is that it really doesn't give you an opportunity to sell yourself for a particular career opportunity. Some people prefer to send in cover letters. I'm afraid that in this day and age, almost no one reads them. It's a 30-second scan of your CV. That's what in reality happens. So you have to get that relevant information on the CV right in front of the person straight from the get-go. And your CV is your one opportunity to do that. And it needs to have all the pertinent details. It's the difference between a public profile and a private profile. It's one that's been specifically tailored and has a lot more maybe confidential information in it, but you really need to use that opportunity to sell yourself.